You're listening to episode 102 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Carol Horton joins us to speak about best practices for yoga in the criminal justice system. Hi everyone. Before we begin today's episode, I want to mention that I will be teaching a mindfulness-based stress reduction, or MBSR course, live online through the presentmomentmindfulness.com website starting in January. This is offered on a donation basis, not at a set cost, and will be held on Saturdays from noon to about 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern U.S. time. If you're interested in finding out more or applying for the course, details and links to apply will be posted on presentmomentmindfulness.com and on our social media presence. Hope you're able to join me and my co-teacher, Amy Ballantyne, in 2018. Offering programming of all kinds within the criminal justice system runs into difficulties, and those challenges are even larger when there's an accompanying misunderstanding about them. Yoga, for example, does not necessarily conflict with an appropriate separation of church and state when it's clearly a non-religious practice with aims of interpersonal connection and personal growth. How those problems are met and overcome is the subject of this third book in a series of best practices. Carol Horton, PhD, holds a doctorate in political science from the University of Chicago, served on the faculty at Macalester College, and has extensive experience as a research consultant specializing in issues affecting low-income children and families. A certified forest yoga teacher, she teaches women incarcerated in the Cook County Jail with Yoga for Recovery and at Chaturanga Holistic Fitness in Chicago. She's the author of Race and the Making of American Liberalism and co-editor, with Roseanne Harvey, of 21st Century Yoga, Culture, Politics, and Practice. Our guest today returning to the podcast is our friend Carol Horton. Carol, welcome back. Nice to see you again.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
For those who are listening, you may recall that Carol was with us in episode 47 on yoga, mindfulness, and social justice. And we have a somewhat different topic today that has some overlap with that. Carol, as of this recording, you just concluded an Indiegogo campaign. Tell us what that was for and how it went.
Yes, it was a crowdfunding campaign on the Indiegogo platform to raise $5,000 to disseminate a book that I just finished editing with a whole bunch of other wonderful people involved in the writing of this book called Best Practices for Yoga in the Criminal Justice System. And this was supported by our partner, the Omega Institute. I'm with the Yoga Service Council. We organized it as part of a series of books that we call Yoga Service Best Practice Guides. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to raise the money not to support the writing and production of the book, which we happily were able to have covered, but to be able to fund disseminating the book to people and organizations who wouldn't otherwise have access to it unless we could get them a free copy of it. So we had a couple of types of people and places in mind with this. So we can go into this more later, but each of these books in this series, it's not like quote unquote normal book where sort of one author or editor is really sort of in charge of producing all the content, more or less. These books involve a lot of people. So we had almost 30 experts in the field involved in either contributing to the substance of the book or reviewing the contents and giving their ideas. And many of those people work in correctional facilities or lead yoga service organizations that have lots of contact with the judicial system, maybe drug courts, that sort of thing. So many of those people and people we know, in addition to wanting books perhaps for their own trainings and friends and colleagues, they might know people who are well placed in government, working in various sorts of correctional facilities, who are maybe judges or probation officers or that sort of people who are sympathetic to this idea of having more programming for incarcerated people, who support the idea of having mindful yoga programs there, or maybe they already have them, but would like to understand them better, would like to understand how the quality should be high, what sort of people they should hire. So we now have funding. So if somebody says, hey, I'll hand deliver 12 copies of this book to people like that who I know when I see them and tell them, how they can use this and why this is a good idea. Now I can say, fine, I'll send you those copies. Just give me the information about where it's going. There's also organizations that already exist that disseminate books to prison libraries or make them available to incarcerated people who request them. So I'm planning to connect with those organizations. I've already done some online research, and there's quite an infrastructure there that I can tap into, because I'm also, in addition to being the editor, in charge of the marketing and dissemination. We're a very small organization, so we tend to wear a lot of hats. And then finally, we're also planning just a public social media platform-based campaign where people can request a copy of the book for free, and we would ask that they explain to us who they are and why they need a free copy and how they can make use of it. And we did this with our previous book in the series, which I also edited, which was called Best Practices for Yoga with Veterans. And we reached a lot of people that way, in the VA, veterans themselves, high school teachers who work with kids who've had a lot of trauma, who could see how they could benefit from this, and all of them explain why they could use a free copy. So it's not that we want to give away all our copies, but we recognize that the copies that we sell, we want to, we're a nonprofit, so we're really looking to get the book into the hands of the right sort of people who can work with it to make a difference in the world. So that's what we're looking to do. So the crowdfunding campaign was very successful. We exceeded our goal of $5,000, which will enable us to disseminate well over 500 copies of the book this way.
And I saw that it exceeded the goals. I was so happy to see that when I first found from your posts about it that this is a worthwhile effort. And for those who are listening, I just want to mention, and I'll bring this up at the end as well, is that links to the previous best practices book from you and the Yoga Service Council will be available on the episode page, as well as various ways that Carol just mentioned about this new book and ways in which you can find that. That'll also be on the episode page, along with links to Yoga Service Council. So you'll be able to find all of that there. And I want to ask about, you were mentioning this as a shared effort, and along with your previous best practices book that you and the Yoga Service Council have done.
Actually, we've done two. The first one was on schools. So.
On schools as well. And that will also,
this one's going to be on sexual trauma survivors. So.
And again, for people listening, we'll have links to those on the episode page too. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about the people that you brought into this effort, because it's, as you're mentioning, this is a little different book. It's not a yoga book by just yoga teachers. There's more to it than that. And you said a little bit about that already. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit more about some of the kinds of people who contributed to this.
Yeah, so for each of these books, we try to bring together a variety of people with expertise in bringing mindful yoga to a particular population. And we're able to do this through our partnership with the Omega Institute, which gives us the opportunity to actually physically invite 25 people to spend a week at the Omega Institute together to lay the foundation for these books. So what we do is we have a program manager and editor at the Yoga Service Council who put together a list of people. We invite them and they come out and basically do a week of kind of facilitated brainstorming, which generates the core content for the book. So we always try to have as much of a variety of professional expertise as we can. So in this case, we had quite a few people who are yoga teachers, but they also run successful nonprofit organizations who offer yoga in the criminal justice system. So we had the ED of Yoga Behind Bars, Rosa Visser in Washington, Sarah Joy Marsh, actually in Portland, Oregon, Prison Yoga Project. We had several people from that organization, Liberation Prison Yoga in New York. So there's a whole side of it that is the yoga teaching, but also then there's the organizational development, which we pay a lot of attention to, because how do you build an organization that's capable of giving these teachers opportunities to go teach? How are they recruited? How are they trained? How are they sustained in this work? How can you get money to keep this going so everyone doesn't burn out? What do you need to look for? How do you mentor and support people? So there's a lot of organizational development stuff. Then we also looked for people who have had the experience of being incarcerated themselves and are involved in this work. So we had Michael Huggins, who is with Transformation Yoga Project now in Pennsylvania, and one of his colleagues came out. But he's a former CEO who has a very fascinating story, which he wrote about in a book called Going Om, a CEO's journey from prison facility to spiritual tranquility, which I highly recommend. It's a very good read. So he has a very unusual story about how yoga helped him get through a very difficult and unexpected chapter in his life. My friend and colleague Marshawn Feltes, who's in Chicago here with me, where I'm based, he grew up in one of our very troubled low-income neighborhoods and had kind of a lot of the typical problems that youth have, and was incarcerated as an older teen and learned yoga in prison in Illinois. And it just really deeply spoke to him. And when he was released, he became formally trained. He actually was informally trained while incarcerated, started a yoga studio in a very low-income African American neighborhood where he's from in Chicago called Austin. And he does a lot. He now goes back to Cook County Jail and does mindfulness, yoga, and sort of talk groups with men there, and also speaks a lot to high schools. We had a woman who works as a warden in the Midwest. We had a woman who works in the Bay Area, is a behavioral health person and does a lot with in the juvenile justice system there. We have a former judge. We have people with backgrounds in trauma therapy, nursing, suicide prevention, victim advocacy. So there's a list with people's bios at the back of the book, and it was also linked to in the Indiegogo campaign. It's, a really impressive group of people, and I hate to kind of name names because I can't go through easily the full list and there's just so many great, wonderful organizations that were involved in this. The Art of Yoga Project in the Bay Area integrates yoga, mindfulness, ethics, and creative expression with girls who are incarcerated in juvenile youth detention facilities. I learned is the better word, in the Bay Area. So it's really a wonderful group of people. I have to say that working with these people during the past year has been really uplifting when so many other things seem to be going so badly in our country and our world. It's been really nice to be really plugged into how many different types of people in different fields are really doing wonderful work.
That's great. And what better way to develop best practices than by having a collective intellect and experiential background from which to draw? That's a terrific way to do it.
It is.
So I'm wondering, Carol, what are some of the unique considerations for bringing yoga into a criminal justice setting? Because it's a little different than going to your local yoga studio.
Yeah, for sure. So One of our concerns was really training that teachers should have. And there's a strong consensus that there should be a higher level of training than is, I guess, the norm. I would say required, because yoga is an unregulated field. And there's many concerns in just the mainstream yoga world about the training standards and expectations as it is. But bracketing that,
As you and I have spoken about that before, same thing with mindfulness, yes.
yeah, there's a certain norm of a 200-hour foundational training in the field due to this standard put forward by Yoga Alliance, which is the closest thing we have to like a professional, I don't know, body. So in addition to that, there's a strong feeling that people should have training in what's called trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive yoga, which is a growing sort of subfield within the yoga world that is just like what it sounds like. It's thinking deeply about how to teach a group yoga class in ways that will be maximally healing and maximally safe for people who are likely, when you're working with populations where there's likely to be a higher than usual incidence of trauma, although, I think they're good principles to be familiar with in any event. So trauma-informed yoga, also understanding about the criminal justice system itself is very important. And in all the books that we do in this series, we talk about, trying to figure out what sort of language to use, just, how to refer to people correctly. When you're an outsider to a certain sort of organizational system, you don't always know important things.
Right. The cultural considerations may not be on your radar.
Don't call the people who work there guards. That's considered offensive in that world. Call them correctional officers or officers. Don't call people who are incarcerated criminals, certainly. Be thoughtful about the terms you use, and then also just learning about the system you're in. We feel that from a social justice perspective, it's really important to be very reflective about the sort of crossing of social boundaries that's likely to occur when a yoga teacher comes in and works with people in the criminal justice system. It's not always the case that there's differences in terms of race and class and life experience and so on, but it is often the case. And so that is a whole part of the yoga practice then, is sort of becoming more educated about those differences and learning to negotiate them in ways that produce healing and growth for all concerned, including the teacher and the students. So training is a big issue. There's also issues about dress, what to wear, what you can bring in, what you can't bring in. And again, most common scenario we're talking about here is working in some sort of facility, although there's other settings, there's halfway houses, there's drug programs, there's post-release programs, and so on and so forth. But say you were going into a facility, definitely no, tight-fitting clothes, as people often usually wear now to teach or practice yoga. Definitely have to dress more modest, being aware of colors, not wearing the same colors as people on the inside. If there are gangs in that area, not wearing gang colors, not wearing, dangly earrings, not wearing hairpins or barrettes, that anything that can be, if lost, could cause everything to shut down. You can't really bring in anything except your car keys. So there's a lot of things that people might not necessarily think of, again, if they're not familiar with this sort of work. Then the sort of room you'd be working in would be quite different often than, the studio, the space that's set up for this. So thinking about how do you make the most of what you have and learn to work with the difficulties and distractions and challenges and interruptions in a way that, again, everything becomes a teachable moment. Everything becomes a part of the practice itself. And so there's a lot of kind of, I think, expanding in a certain way the very concrete dimensions of what is part of the teaching and learning process. So I think it really requires more of a contextual awareness of your social environment from the very nitty-gritty granular level of, for example, I used to go in and teach in Cook County Jail regularly, and you had to come early to move all this furniture around and things like that, to these more macro social issues of who are you as whatever, like in my case, sort of, white, highly educated, relatively whatever, going into a setting like Cook County Jail, and am I really showing up in an authentic way, and am I really educating myself about what this environment is and what's going on there? And I have to say that my former background was academia, and I have a PhD in political science, even worked on issues of race and class. And I have to say that doing this work taught me things about the system which have been very eye-opening, that I just simply had no awareness of, and I thought I was an aware person. So it can be, all these things that they sort of, I guess what I'm trying to say is they go from a very practical level of things you might not think of, like don't come in with barrettes in your hair because if you drop one, everything could go on lockdown or something. You wouldn't think of two things that are kind of very, I want to say abstract, but sort of large scale. So I think it is very different than going into a studio where we could actually use more of this stuff there, but it's not as much of a clear necessity as it is when you work in an environment like the criminal justice system.
Yeah, Carol, you had mentioned that there was a bit of a shift for you, some eye-opening aspects to it when you went into the system. Even though you'd had this background in education in it, there was a bit of a difference when you were in and doing these programs. I'm wondering if you might be able to share some of the experiences you've had in delivering yoga in this kind of setting. How did the participants respond? And what was it like for you?
Well, so just to be clear, I mean, some of the eye-opening stuff was more just learning about the system that's like literally kind of in my backyard. Like I'm 15 minutes away from the largest jail in the United States. And I actually didn't know that much about it. And some of it has been just the experience of teaching. I mean, I think, and this is a bracket, I'm kind of going through some similar things with people about voter registration now, because we have a voter registration drive in Cook County Jail. This has nothing to do with yoga, but what I see there is the same as I felt with initially as someone who had never had anything to do with the criminal justice system. Entering into that facility was psychologically and emotionally challenging and kind of scary. So, I mean, I think there's a lot of fear with something that we don't know. And of course, this is an inherently scary kind of thing, like, who are these people? And, what is this place? And, things are locked and, there's barbed wire. And if that's something you've never dealt with, there's a lot of unknowns. So I think, well, in my experience, I was working for about 5 years with a local nonprofit called Yoga for Recovery, which only works with women in Cook County Jail, which is in Chicago. I think I found that the ability to feel a sense of connection with people that seemed, from in my side of it, very authentic and positive was once I could get grounded and focus on just being very present and doing what I was there to do and offering the practice was actually on the whole quite easy. Now, I don't want to say like it sounded like it was just a snap or whatever, but there was a level in which I felt that the students who would show up for a yoga class in a context like that, where it is voluntary, were ready to kind of, on the whole, ready to sort of step into a more sort of open exploration of the experience than is often the case in a studio setting or, say, a gym setting, where often people come to a class with a lot of, whether they know it or not, preset ideas about what they're there for. And there to exercise in this particular way or relax in that particular way. And people have a lot of boundaries and barriers, some of which they're aware of and some of which they're not often. And the practice stays more circumscribed. My experience is that when dealing with students who are probably on the whole often very new to this, if not completely new to it, are willing to try something and know that they're in a difficult time in their lives, there was a level of kind of openness to just exploring, like, well, what can this be and what can it offer me? That I think often made me feel like the class time kind of hit that note of connection and shifting to a different way of being in the moment, both within oneself and with others, which was very gratifying. You know, so it definitely made me. I feel like, to get a little more philosophical about it in terms of terms, it really was a non-dual experience. In the sense of kind of the both and, not that everything dissolved into one by any means, but it was possible to, like, really, for me, sort of both be aware of the differences of me being able to come and go and be in a very different sort of life situation than most of the students. I didn't know anything about these people, and just seeing the variety of people who were in the room and so on, but also, despite all their individual differences, knowing they were in a structural situation that was so different from me, they can't leave, at least not today. And knowing all those differences, and yet feeling within 45 minutes or an hour or so, being able to really attain a level sense of kind of peace and connection and healing that felt very visceral. And I would say most of the time, sure, sometimes there's some disruptions and so on, but my feeling then on the whole was that the experience was super positive, and it definitely was very affirming for me in my faith in yoga practice. I think, given all of the kind of commercialism and shallowness that everyone's always complaining about, at least in my neck of the woods, and I share those complaints in many ways. It's easy to feel that, like, this is just sort of I don't know, like a kind of dumb thing to spend a lot of time on. But being able to teach in these kind of environments and feel that, like, really walk out feeling like, I feel like something happened there. I mean, I can't prove it, and I don't think it would be easy to do, but certainly, feedback is positive, and it's just sort of a felt sense of a sort of shift, and people wanting to come back and keep doing this, and being appreciative that they were offered it. But it's really, more than anything else, just a sort of felt sense that something happened here that was worthwhile for me, and I think worthwhile for at least many of these students. And this is something that I believe is helping us connect to the best part of ourselves. And even if we can kind of plug into that deeper spirit momentarily, I think it kind of opens up a wellspring of human potential, So that's why I see yoga as, at its best, sort of tapping us into that inner spirit. I don't know, the words aren't really there, but it's like there's something sort of deeply healing and integrative when we really get to this ground of just sort of being present in a way that's compassionate and like deeply well-intentioned as much as we can make it. I think it really taps us into something very regenerative. And so I think that is valuable. So it affirmed my faith in, that I'm not like a complete crazy person for being so into yoga.
And I would think, especially moving in an environment that would otherwise, I imagine, be very oppressive to the human spirit.
It is. The system, that's the other part of it. I've just been appalled by what I've learned. And we have 9,000-10,000 people incarcerated in any given day here, the vast majority of whom are not convicted of anything. This is the thing. Like, people who can't pay $300 bond or something like that in Chicago are locked up. Our own sheriff talks publicly all the time about how, because we have no mental health facilities available on the whole, like 1/3 of the people who are in that jail are in need of mental health services.
Right.
And, they're really there. And they actually are trying to have more programming and help for them there, but that's not where they should be. And it's actually a highly traumatizing environment. So, it's just a terrible situation. And I mean, it just could go on.
Yeah,
about
making
like
the
the
problems worse for those who are already
people
suffering.
don't have a chance, like, there's not enough public defenders. People are forced into these plea bargainings and even the sheriff will say this. People accept plea bargains because they want to get out of jail, even if they're innocent, because things are set up in such a way that going to trial is, risky, expensive, and a further disruption of your ability to just like live your life. So it's a terrible system, and I do feel that changing the system in a political way is an absolute priority. However, I have talked with people who have been incarcerated who, really were helped by yoga practices, often mindfulness practice as well, or meditation practices, who said, look, like, if you're there now, like, you need something now to help you get through this now. So I feel like there's an important role for this kind of direct service work. And I do feel that the practices that help people who are interested and who are open and ready and whatever, and I think there's a lot of those people who are incarcerated, help them connect with that sort of deeper wellspring of themselves and their inner goodness, are very important to helping people survive what is probably a very oppressive and often unjust experience.
So, what are some recommendations you might have for those who are considering offering yoga in this way, in this setting?
Well, I feel that definitely, connect with people who, if possible, depending on where you are, who are knowledgeable and who can provide mentorship and access and so on. That's going to be easier on the whole on the coast than in many parts of the country. We have in the book a lot of recommendations. If you're somewhere where there's no one to connect with, there's no programs, there's no whatever, just getting in somewhere is going to take some persistence. So, getting the training, getting the additional training we talked about earlier, but then also just realizing that getting in the door can be challenging. So in the book, we have a lot of suggestions really about how to engage with that process and how to get in. And I think it's going to be increasingly easier. We've seen a tremendous shift just in the past 5 years in the openness of the system to allow this sort of thing in. And the book also is meant to be a legitimator. So we have this with a veterans book as well, where teachers who want to go to a VA hospital or something where there's nothing like this, they bring the book. It's like, and here's something where there's 30 people often with credentials after their names, and all this, like, this is a real thing. This is part of the point of it, in addition to the educational aspect, is like a legitimating aspect that hey, there's a lot of really smart people with a lot of experience from many different fields who think this is worthwhile. This isn't just like a flaky fly-by-night idea to bring in yoga into the criminal justice system. So the idea is that this can help open doors.
So, I also want you to say just a bit about Yoga Service Council, what they are, because all of this work has been really fostered and supported through that organization. So if you could say a bit about that too.
Yeah, so the Yoga Service Council is a nonprofit organization that functions as best we can as kind of an umbrella organization to bring together all of the individuals and organizations that are really committed to sharing yoga and mindfulness practices in ways that make them truly accessible to everybody. So in practice, that means we have a lot of people and small nonprofits or maybe unincorporated groups or some for-profit businesses who are doing things like offering yoga and mindfulness practices in public school systems or in low-income communities or in community health centers or in the criminal justice system and so on and so forth. So it is really looking to take these practices outside of just a market-driven setting of studios and gyms, but also to, influence how people think about yoga within those settings, because we really are trying to also provide a frame of understanding yoga or yoga service as something that can be practiced in ways that equally integrate the practices, the inner inquiry and self-reflection, and the conscious relationship with others. So the relational aspect of it is just as important in our conception of yoga service as what you do as an individual or the actual practices. So it's a little different framing we're trying to explore. So we have a conference once a year at the Omega Institute. We have the best practice series of books. We have a series of what we call community resource papers, which are free downloadable resources for people interested in this sort of work. We try to build community. We try to connect people who are interested in this work so we can support each other and learn from each other. We try to raise the standards in the field and make it more of a field so that there's a sense of a commitment to learning and to really offering these practices in ways that are safe, effective, culturally sensitive, and socially just.
So for those who are listening, and I'll be linking to this and actually several things on the episode page, you can go to yogaservicecouncil.org to find out more about that. And our guest today, Carol Horton. Carol, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.